Meghan said titles meant nothing, and now everything is collapsing because of them. That contradiction isn't just embarrassing, it's explosive, because buried inside that one statement is a timeline of panic, power, money, and a legal trap that looks impossible to escape. And once you follow the sequence closely, detail by detail, something far more unsettling begins to surface. This was never about status alone. It was about survival. March 2nd, 2021, the Oprah interview. Meghan sits there, calm, controlled, and delivers a line that sounded simple at the time, but now feels loaded with consequences. Titles, not important, not something to worry about. A clean, confident dismissal that suggested independence from royal structures. But fast forward to November 2025, and suddenly the narrative fractures. Reports describe Meghan as panicked, defiant, consulting lawyers, preparing for a fight that didn't exist 4 years earlier. Same person, same title, completely different reaction. So what changed? Because according to the legal record, not the law. That contradiction becomes even sharper when you realize what nobody emphasized at the time. The title Meghan is reportedly preparing to fight for isn't legally hers, not in the way most people assume. It exists, yes, it carries weight, influence, recognition, but legally, it's a shadow, a derivative, something that exists only because of Harry. Remove the source and the shadow disappears without resistance. No courtroom battle, no dramatic legal showdown, just gone. Instantly.
Should the title, we've seen with Andrew, you can remove the title. It can be done. This idea before was, well, you can't do it. Well, actually, you can. We literally just did it. And Andrew's not been convicted. Andrew's not been convicted of any crime, right? But he's lost everything, and he fends for himself now. Why don't we just do that with these?
Now here's where the structure begins to tighten, almost like a trap closing in layers. Harry holds multiple titles, each governed by different rules, different mechanisms. Some permanent, some flexible, some untouchable. And inside that structure, Meghan's position becomes painfully clear. She doesn't own a title in her own right. She borrows it, legally, structurally, completely dependent on Harry's status, which means if anything is removed, it's removed from Harry, and she simply loses access. That's not speculation, that's framework. And once you accept that, the first illusion collapses. Because how do you defend something in court that you don't legally possess?
Now has got even more ammunition to say to his father, enough's enough. Let us get rid of this family. Let us even strip them of their titles, just in the same way as Andrew.
That's wall one, no legal standing. But then comes something even more decisive, something that doesn't just weaken a case, it erases the possibility of a case entirely. The phrase sounds technical, almost harmless, but its impact is absolute, not amenable to judicial review. 4 words, that's all it takes. Translation? No court can even hear the argument. Not reject it, not debate it, not consider it, just refuse it completely. Think about that for a second. Not losing a case, never being allowed to file one, because the mechanism used to remove the title letter's patent is a royal prerogative, and the legal analysis from barristers is blunt. That decision cannot be challenged in court. The door isn't locked. It doesn't exist. And if that wasn't enough, there's another layer sitting right behind it, almost invisible unless you're looking for it. Sovereign immunity. The future king cannot be sued in civil proceedings. Not partially, not indirectly, completely immune. So even if someone wanted to challenge the decision, who exactly are they suing?
Is Meghan to blame? Is she the instigator? Is she the bad influence?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Meghan is a source of evil. Many years ago, and it didn't make me popular with some, because she only thinks of herself. She is only focused on self-promotion, profits for her, doesn't care who gets damaged, and has behaved disgracefully, and has never made amends. And that is a problem, and has used Harry and abused the royal family. And I think that that is really where, in that whole phrase, she's brainwashed Harry, she's now going to get it back.
Now step back. Look at the pattern for me. No ownership of the title. No court that can hear the case. No legal target to sue. 3 separate barriers, each one independent, each one absolute. And yet, the narrative of a legal fight still exists. Why? Because what happened to Andrew created confusion. A moment that looked like precedent, but wasn't. His titles were stripped rapidly, almost surgically. 4 days. Fast, clean, but the deeper truth is more complicated. His dukedom remained untouched because removing a peerage requires parliament, a completely different process. And this is where things get unsettling again. Because if Harry's dukedom were ever removed, something unexpected happened. Meghan doesn't become untitled. She becomes something else entirely. Princess Henry of Wales. A title that exists, but not the one she built her identity around. Not the one tied to brand, influence, recognition, so the fight, if it exists, isn't about having a title. It's about keeping a specific one. And suddenly the story shifts again, away from legality toward value. Because when you follow the timeline into 2026, something else begins to collapse. Quietly, financially, structurally, deals disappear. Revenue streams shrink. Legal battles intensify. Costs rise. And in the middle of that shift, one thing remains stable. One thing still holds weight without requiring a new deal, a new platform, or a new audience.
Inspiration and failure. Meghan is someone who is desperate for fame. She's desperate for money, of course, and status. And it just seems to her that a visit to the royal family would give her or restore to her the credibility she wants.
And that's where the contradiction from 2021 starts to feel less like a statement and more like a miscalculation. Because if titles truly didn't matter then, why do they matter now? Why consult lawyers? Why prepare for a fight that legally cannot be fought? Everything starts tightening the moment the commercial reality crashes into the legal reality. Because that's the point where the story stops being about royal symbolism and starts becoming brutally transactional. And Tom Bauer documented that shift with unsettling clarity when Tom Bauer laid out the numbers in March 2026. Numbers that don't whisper, they expose. Because suddenly the Sussex operation isn't this expanding global empire anymore. It's a structure under pressure. A structure needing roughly $3 million a year just to stay stable. While revenue streams that once looked permanent begin to quietly disappear one by one, Netflix equity gone, partnerships uncertain, income thinning, and right in the middle of that erosion sits the one asset that doesn't require negotiation, reinvention, or relaunch to hold its value. The title, the single remaining piece of leverage that still opens doors without asking permission. Which is exactly why the Radar Online description from November 2025 suddenly feels less like gossip and more like a warning signal. Because when that source described Meghan as panicked and defiant, emphasizing that titles still matter enormously, it wasn't exaggeration, it was alignment with the same conclusion Tom Bauer reached from a completely different direction, that influence. Media relevance and commercial positioning are tied directly to being the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and once that connection is removed, the entire dynamic doesn't weaken, it shifts completely into something unrecognizable, something far less powerful. Now trace that against the timeline again, slowly, because the sequence itself tells a story most people miss. May 19, 2018. Harry is granted the Dukedom of Sussex. Meghan becomes Duchess of Sussex instantly, not through independent grant, but through derivation. A structural dependency that never changes. Then March 7, 2021, the Oprah interview locks in a public position that titles were not something we were worried about. A statement that sounded confident, almost dismissive, but now sits uncomfortably against what follows. June 20th, 2022, the removal of titles bill is introduced, an attempt to create a legal pathway that ultimately fails, never even reaching committee stage, which means the deeper mechanism to remove a peerage still doesn't exist in practical terms. Then October 30th to November 5th, 2025, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor becomes the case everyone watches. Stripped quickly of fur and print styling, but crucially not stripped of the Dukedom of York, because the law simply doesn't allow that without Parliament, and that detail missed, glossed over, misunderstood becomes the pivot point for everything that follows. Because in November 2025, when Radar Online reports Meghan consulting legal experts, preparing for a fight, something else is happening beneath the surface. No name lawyer, no filed case, just preparation against a threat that legally cannot be challenged, because the same three walls still stand exactly where they stood in 2021. Unchanged, immovable, absolute. No legal standing because the title is not independently held. No judicial review because the instrument used to remove HRH is outside court jurisdiction. And no legal target because the future king carries sovereign immunity, and yet despite those barriers, the urgency increases, not decreases, which only makes sense if the pressure isn't legal, it's financial. Because by March 6, 2026, Netflix exits, the commercial landscape tightens further. Then March 26, 2026, Tom Bauer publishes Betrayal, reinforcing the idea that the title itself is collateral, a brand asset holding up the remaining structure. And then July 7, 2026, the annual eventual ruling lands, all 97 allegations dismissed, followed by the looming costs hearing on July 29th to 30th, 2026, where financial exposure could become uncapped, turning pressure into risk and risk into urgency. And once you connect those moments, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore because nothing about the legal framework has shifted at all. Not in 2021, not in 2025, not now. The same barriers existed then as they do now, which means the only variable that changed is the value of the title itself, its importance rising in direct proportion to the collapse of alternative assets, until it becomes the last stable pillar holding everything up, and that's where the contradiction stops being rhetorical and becomes strategic. Because Meghan didn't suddenly misunderstand the law never changed, but the stakes did, dramatically, quietly, and almost invisibly to anyone not tracking the financial timeline alongside the legal one. And that leads to the question that refuses to settle, because it doesn't resolve cleanly, it lingers, it pressures every part of the narrative. If Meghan could say in March 2021 that titles were not something we were worried about, while the exact same legal structure existed, and then by November 2025 be described as panicked and defiant, consulting lawyers to preserve those titles. What actually shifted in that 4-year window? Not legally, not structurally, but commercially, strategically, personally. What transformed a symbolic label into something worth fighting for against impossible odds? Because when 3 legal walls make protection impossible and the financial pressure makes loss catastrophic, the story stops being about whether the title can be saved and starts becoming about how long it can be held before something or someone decides the timing is right to remove it.